Okay, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. We're talking about Google Spreadsheets today, how to write your own custom functions, your own custom menu items, as well as doing some macros. So before we get started, there was a question earlier about whether or not we're going to post the information you see here today so that you guys can access it, and I will do that. So I'm going to post it in the InstructureCon course. There's a discussions area for this topic, and I'll post all these links in there. Actually, what I'm going to do is that I've created an example spreadsheet, and I'm going to make that available to everybody, and so that you can see the actual code that we've written, I will make you all editors on that document. So please make your own copy and then edit that document. So don't edit my document, because then everybody else is going to get your edits, and I'm sure they will be great, but maybe you mess something up, I don't know. So make a copy of your own document. Also, on that note, I'll reiterate this, but make sure that, so we're going to be doing some access to the Canvas API, and in order to do that, you need to have an access token. Do not make your access token public. Mine will be public. Immediately after this, I'm going to generate a new one so it doesn't work anymore. But when you make a copy, make sure that your copy of the spreadsheet is private so that no one else can see your access token. It's very important. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Nick Nelson. I am a Scrum Master here at Instructure. I've been here for about 2 years. Nick at Instructure is my email address, so if you want to get a hold of me afterwards, feel free to send me an email. Originally, I'm from San Pedro, California. It's the southwest corner of Los Angeles, right next to Long Beach, if you know where that is. Came to Utah in 2001 and went to BYU. Graduated in 2008 with a degree in bioinformatics. And for everybody who's checking the math, yes, I went to college for 7 years, okay? But you know what? A lot of people go to college for 7 years, so it's really not that big a deal. Part of the reason that I took so long, I lived in Brazil for 2 years in Sao Paulo. So that was part of it. And then I also had a problem with skateboarding. We had a skateboard ramp in my basement, so that kind of cut into study time every now and then. So again, what we're going to talk about today, custom functions, custom menu items, macros, how to connect to the Canvas API, and setting up automatic triggers. How we're going to do it, we're actually going to run through an example problem, and this is the spreadsheet that I've created. We're going to be using what's called Google Script, which is basically just JavaScript plus some libraries that they've created. And you can find access to these libraries here on this reference document. So it's got all the different functions and things that Google has made available to you. As you can see, Spreadsheet is just one small subset of the things you can do. There's Forms and Google Drive, Gmail, all kinds of different stuff that you can do. But we're just going to talk about Spreadsheets. So why are we talking about this? Well, part of my role as a Scrum Master in Instructure, I collect a lot of metrics. So we measure, I work with the engineers, our development department, and we try to measure just about everything that we can to make sure that things are running smoothly. So I track all the teams, how much they produce each week, what types of things are they working on, bugs, features, technical debt, all kinds of different stuff. And so I was very heavily involved with spreadsheets. And I ended up getting a lot of functions that looked like this. And I'm sure you guys have seen things like this, or you've probably seen a lot worse, where you've got 3 or 4 different standard functions from Google, and you put it together, you come back a week later, you have no idea what it means, and it takes you another 20 minutes just to figure out what it was that you did. So I said, well, there's got to be a better way. And so I started looking into it, and it turns out, I could make a function that instead of the top one, I could make one that looks like that at the bottom. A lot easier to use. Obviously, there's more work on the back end, but it's kind of a trade-off. So here is our example problem. So we're going to be an elementary school teacher going on a field trip to the La Brea Tar Pits. Now, I realize that many of you, if not most, are from higher education institutions and probably are not going on field trips with your students. But a lot of the principles that we're going to talk about obviously still apply to what you guys are doing. And this example just kind of encompasses a lot of the different techniques that you can use in Google Documents. So a couple other applications, maybe you send out surveys, and instead of paying for a big fancy survey tool, you just use Google Forms, and that all comes back into a spreadsheet, and you want to be able to do your own analytics on it. That's something you can use. Another application that I use is using one sheet as sort of a master record. What I mean by that is a lot of times, I try to avoid this as much as I can, but you end up maintaining the same data in 2 different spreadsheets, and anytime you do that, they're going to get out of sync, and it's a terrible nightmare to try and keep them in sync. So one thing that you can do is you can actually set up an automatic script so that Google will copy what's on one page and copy it to a separate spreadsheet so that they stay in sync every minute, every hour, every night, whatever you want to do. So that's sort of another example. So again, back to our example problem. Now, in order to go on the field trip, the students have to meet some requirements, okay? First, they have to have turned in their permission slip. They have to be on good behavior. So I don't know if it's the same at your elementary school, but when I was there, we had these cards on the wall, and if you misbehaved, you took out your green card, and you had a yellow one, then you take out your yellow card and your red, and you get, a note sent home or whatever the case is. So permission slip, good behavior, and you have to have turned in 3 out of 5 assignments. So let's go take a look at our spreadsheet here. So first what we're going to do is I'm just going to use the spreadsheet as if I was the teacher, and then we'll get into exactly how we did it, how it all works. So here we have all the students' names. Over on the left-hand side, we have the assignments, we have their permission slip, we have their behavior, and then we have, of course, whether or not they have completed the assignment or not. And then in this column, we have whether or not they're eligible. So this is where I've written a custom function called isEligible. You can see it takes 2 parameters, takes the student name, and then takes this other parameter, which is a reference to this sheet here and this cell, and I'll explain exactly why we had to do that in just a minute. So let's pretend that I'm the teacher, and I'm going to come in here and say, okay, I want to see who is eligible to go on this field trip. So I'm going to come up to my custom menu item, and I'm going to click on refresh, and I want to refresh my assignment submissions. So what this is doing right now is actually going out to the Canvas API, and it's grabbing all the assignment submissions, bringing those back in, populating them here, and then rerunning this isEligible function to see who is eligible to go on the field trip. Okay? So, okay, great. So now I know everybody that's eligible to go on the field trip. I've got my list. Let's see. I bet, some of these people are not eligible simply because they haven't turned in their permission slip. So I want to send out a reminder, and they're elementary school students, so I'm going to remind their parents or whoever the email address is on file that we have in Canvas. I'm going to send them an email just to remind everybody. And I don't want to open up an email. I mean, it's only, there's probably only 10 or so people here, but if you had multiple classes with a lot of people, it'd be kind of a hassle to type in everybody's email address. So I'm going to come over to my other custom menu item, click on Send Email, and what this is doing is sending everybody an email saying that you have not yet turned in your permission slip. So you can see here, we've got our permission slip. It says your student at blah, blah, blah school has not turned in their permission slip, and so on. You can customize that to say just about anything that you would like. Okay, so the next thing, let's say we've got a few people on here. Let's take Job, for example, who is on yellow behavior, but is currently eligible to go on the field trip. So let's say that Job is in the back of the classroom doing some magic tricks, and or illusions, if you will, right? So we're going to say, you know what? You are not on yellow behavior. You're busted. I'm changing you to red. Now you can't go on the field trip. However, change it to red, you can see here that this is still green. It's kind of a problem. The reason being is that Google considers whenever you put a custom function into a cell, they consider that to be deterministic, meaning same input always yields the same output. So again, we didn't change any input. It's still the same student, and we're still referencing the same cell, which still has the same value. So Google's not going to rerun that function to update this. So this is why we've added another parameter and we're referencing this cell here on the refresh page, right? So in order to update the isEligible column, we come over here to the refresh menu, and I'm going to click on isEligible. So what that does is it's going to put in a new date and time stamp into this cell. So basically what we're doing is we're kind of tricking Google, right, the spreadsheet, into saying, oh, I have a new input, so now I need to rerun the function and see what the output should be. So that's why we have to take these two here, and that's kind of how you get around the deterministic way that Google has implemented this. So now you see that Job is no longer able to go on the field trip because his behavior is red. And that's basically it. So that's how you would use this spreadsheet. So now let's kind of get into how it all works. So we're going to start off with some of the easy stuff. I'm guessing a lot of you already know this, but we'll cover it just in case. How we change the color of the cell? Well, you just come up here to Format. We've got conditional formatting. If it says no, change the background to red. If it says yes, change it to green. Same thing here, and the same thing over here. Instead of the background, we're just changing the text color. Okay, you'll notice in this column we actually have a little drop down. And the way that you get the drop down menu is come over to Data, click on Validation, and you can enter in a comma-separated list of all the things that are allowed to go into that cell, and it will provide a nice little drop down menu for you. So those are pretty simple. Now let's get into the more difficult stuff. So we come over to Tools, we go to Script Editor, and this is going to bring up all of the Google script, or basically JavaScript, that you can add to your spreadsheet. So at the very top, I've added some global variables. So if you're not familiar with JavaScript, how you create a global variable, just put it outside any of the current functions, right? So we've got these two variables up at the top. Again, like I said, this is my token. Don't try to use it because I'm going to generate a new one after, so this won't be broken. And just another reminder, make sure that when you make a copy, please do not share it publicly because people will have access to your token. That's a really bad thing. So the next global variable that we have is called SS, stands for spreadsheet. How you get that, you just say spreadsheet app.getActiveSpreadsheet. So every script, this script here is tied to this spreadsheet. So when I say get active spreadsheet, it's going to automatically grab the spreadsheet that it is tied to. So now we have this spreadsheet object. And in the later functions, we're going to use that to do different things. So let's take a look at our custom function called isEligible. As you can see here, we have takes two parameters, student, and it also takes date time. You'll notice that we don't actually do anything with date time. It's just a parameter, again, just to make Google refresh what's going on and get a new value. So we take a student, and now we're going to create a couple more variables. We got a variable called sheet, and you just say spreadsheet.getSheetByName, eligibility, which is the name of our sheet down here. And then we're going to get a range from within that sheet. So we say sheet.getRange. There's two ways that you can get a range. You can use A1 notation, as they call it here, which is basically just saying get columns A through H. You can also say get row, column, number of rows, and then number of columns. So it's important to point out that if you use this notation where you say get a row and a column, that the index starts at 1. Okay, and that's important to note because when you get the values, when you say range.getValues, it returns a two-dimensional array, and the index starts at 0. That can be really confusing and confuse me for a while. So if you're trying to use the same index number at both the range and the values, you're going to get different things, and it's going to be really confusing. So always remember, ranges start at 1, indexed at 1, and when you get a value, indexed at 0. Okay. And basically, we're not going to go through all the rest of this logic, but this is just going through and saying, okay, do they have a permission slip? Is the behavior not read? Do they have 3 out of 5 assignments? And I've left some comments in here, so hopefully it's self-explanatory. If all of those conditions are met, then it returns a yes. If not, returns a no. And so that's what you see here, yes and no. Okay, so this is an example of a custom function that you're going to add into a cell into your spreadsheet. You don't have to add every custom function into your spreadsheet. You'll see here that I have actually the majority of these functions that I wrote do not actually get placed into a cell. They're just used by other functions, which you can then use to force populate information or data into a cell. Okay, so we'll take a quick break just to see if there's any questions about how we did this or anything that we've talked about so far. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a kind of implementation question. Put the token, you try to put the token in your code. Is there a reason for doing that versus like a hidden lock cell? I'm just wondering what the best way for security.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I chose to do it this way. I guess I don't know. Maybe I didn't think about that I could do it another way. So there's probably other ways, a hidden lock cell that you could probably do. So that's probably a better option. Oh, sorry, the question was, why did I choose to put the token into the script here so you can see it, and why not just put it into like a hidden lock cell and then reference that cell later? And there's no reason. You can choose either way. It probably works. So, okay, any other questions? Nope. All right, so we're going to move on and talk about how you create a custom menu item. So to do that, you're going to create a function called onOpen. OnOpen is a reserved name that Google uses. So every time onOpen is called, every time that a spreadsheet is opened or refreshed, onOpen will get called. Okay? So how you add a menu item, first you create an array. You add key value pairs to the array. And then you use the add menu function to add that array with the name to your spreadsheet. So again, every time you open your spreadsheet, it's going to then call this, and it's going to create these custom menu items. So how you do that, we've got the, so adding these key value pairs, we've got the name, colon, give it a name. This can be anything that you want. Function name, colon. This, of course, has to actually map to one of the functions in your document, which is down here. I've called it refresh yourself. And what refresh yourself does, this just calls sheet by name, gets a range, sets the value to a new date and time string. So, and I wrote it this way. You'll see I wrote it a little bit differently than I did in is eligible. I broke out a bunch of different variables here into 3 pieces. You can also daisy chain stuff into one line like I did here. Whatever you prefer, it all works the same. I actually added another menu item, so I created yet another array, added items to the array, added the array with the name to the menu. And then I actually did refresh yourself so that every time it's opened, is eligible gets recalled again. Okay, any questions about how we do that, how you add a menu item to your spreadsheet? Nope. Okay, up next is we're going to take a look at a function that accesses the Canvas API. And that one is called, this one right here, get assignment subs. Okay, so what we're doing here, so you can see I've actually created a couple other functions. These are just hashes. The reason being is that when you get assignment submissions from the API, it returns user IDs and it returns assignment IDs, which of course mean nothing to us. We want the user name and we want the assignment name. So created a couple functions that are going to help us do that. This gets just a map of username to user ID. This one here gets a map of assignment name to assignment ID so that when we get the submissions, we can sort of massage it all around and actually get the names to come out. Okay, so we've got a variable called submissions. This is going to be an array. We've got a page number, a variable called page. It's going to represent our page number. So this API call is paginated. Not all Canvas API calls are paginated, so you're not going to have to use this while loop for every single time. But this one is paginated, and that's why we have a variable called page. Starts at 1, and we increment it in our do while loop. So first thing we do is create a URL. So this is obviously the API endpoint that we're going to hit. Add the page onto it there. Create a header. Going to pass in our token. Now the URL fetch app.fetch takes 2 parameters, which are URL and options. So we're going to, again, we got our token in our header, add our header to our options, add the options, and pass those in as a parameter. So we're going to store the response that we get back from Canvas in this variable here, and then we're going to parse it out into a temporary submissions. And again, the reason we're doing this is because it's paginated, so we have to go through every single page. We're going to grab the submissions from the first page, add it to this submissions array, and then keep iterating through and looping through and grabbing those. So we're going to do that until Canvas doesn't return anything back to us. It's going to return back an empty array. And so check for the length. As long as it's greater than 0, it's going to keep doing that. Once it's an empty array, we break out of that. And then we're going to use all this information to create our end hash table, which is going to look like this. It's going to have the student name, and then it's going to have all of their assignments and whether or not they have completed them or not completed them. So that's what we're going to return down here. Okay, and then we're going to take that and we're going to create another function. Okay, and this function is used to actually do the updating of the cells in your Google spreadsheet. So you make the call, you get all the assignment submissions, you got this hash that's all ready to go, and I've left some comments so that you have an idea of what that looks like. And then we're going to go through the process of actually updating the cells within your Google Doc. Now, there are 2 ways that you can update the cells in your Google Doc. One, you can get a range, and then you can set the values of the range. The other way is to get a range, then get a cell, and update the value of that specific cell. And they're different, and there's pros and cons to both, so I'm going to go over both of them, and there's an example of each in here. So the first way is we're going to get a range. So we have this blank title range, and that is referring to this row right here. So it's these 6 assignments, and we're going to update those in a range. So we get that range, we're going to set the values, and we're going to set the values using an array. So it's just a, just a list of values that we're going to put in there. Now, the benefit to doing it this way is that you basically make 2 calls. 1 to get the range, 2 to update the values. The downside to it is that you have to know exactly how big your range is, and that must match exactly how big or the number of values that you have. So if you have a range that is, say, 10 cells long, but you try to update that with only 5 values, you're going to get an error. So there's times when you're going to know exactly the size of the range you should get, and there's other times when you're not going to know, and in those times you're going to want to just grab each cell individually, iterate through, and update the individual cell value. So let me show you kind of how you do that. It's basically the same thing. You just take one more step, and so you say, we've got the range here, and you say get cell, and give it a reference, and then you say cell.setValue, and you set the value. The downside to this is that it takes a lot more time. So they're kind of expensive calls to say get range and get cell and set values. So doing it that way, we're making 2 calls for each cell here, as opposed to just making 2 calls for the entire thing. So it's going to take quite a bit longer. I mean, depending on how big your spreadsheet is. You can run into problems. There's actually a 5-minute time limit that Google puts on you for your script to run. So if you're having trouble with the time limit, maybe that's something to think about, is how many calls am I making to get and set different cells. Okay, so then we go through and we set all the values, and actually call this refresh yourself again, just to make sure that the eligibility column is up to date. So that, again, grab values from the API, get the data that we want, and then update your spreadsheet. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about how we did that, or anything else we've talked about up until this point? Nope. Okay. So now let's take a look at our last function, which is to send out an email. Okay, so we've got a function called send email reminder. First thing I do is I call another function which updates the contact info, and again, that's going to the Canvas API, grabbing the email addresses and updating their contact info. Basically what we're doing here is we're going to create a list of everyone that does not have a permission slip. We're then going to compare that list to the information that we have here, and we say, okay, if you're on the list, get your email address. We're going to create this string called email list, which we're then going to use the mail app.sendEmail, and we're going to say who we're going to send it to. Again, I always send it to myself to make sure that it does actually get sent out. Create a subject, and then a BCC, which is just a string of email addresses. Down here we have the HTML body, and that's anything that you want. You can type in, put in there, and that's how the send email app works. Pretty simple. Any questions about that? Nope. Awesome. So again, just reviewing the structure that we've kind of gone over. So you first start out with a spreadsheet app, then you grab a spreadsheet object. From there you get a sheet. From there you get a range, and then depending on how you're going to do it, you grab a cell. So a couple tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. It's important to have a test function. Reason being that if you are testing something like your is eligible, where you're actually going to put it into a cell, if there's no data, if it takes parameters and you're not actually passing it parameters, it's not going to work, right? So you create your own test function and just run that. So if I went up here, I can select the function, test, click on the little play button, and it will actually run the is eligible, passing it this information here. So what I was doing when I was testing. So that was helpful. Let's see, logger.log. Yeah, so you're going to see this quite a bit throughout here. This is kind of the, if you're familiar with JavaScript, it's like the console.log. In Java, it's system.out.println. In Ruby, it's puts. It just allows you to see what the value of a certain variable is so that you know what's going on. You can see that Google provides you with a debugger, but the debugger is kind of worthless if your code doesn't have any bugs. So lots of times your code won't have bugs. It's just returning the wrong information. And in that case, the debugger doesn't work. So you're going to need to use this logger.log. I've commented out, I think, most of them, but logger.log, and then just pass in whatever you want. And then you can come up here to view, and you can see the execution transcript or the logs. That way you can see kind of what's going on. Again, so minimizing calls to get or set information, kind of like what we talked about. Again, you have a 5-minute time limit for your script to run. Okay, so you want to avoid borking your sheet, and a really good way to do that, to bork your sheet, is to divide by 0. Doesn't matter how many times you try. If you divide by 0, you're going to have a problem. I've done this a lot. So I divide by 0, and then I take that value and try to put it into a sheet, into a cell in a sheet. Ruins a sheet. You will never get the information back. You actually can't even delete it through the UI. You have to go and create, as you can see down here, I've got my own delete sheet function, and it just allows me to delete that sheet sort of programmatically through here. So again, really try hard not to divide by 0 or other things, but make sure that you have something in place so that if you do mess it up, you can keep moving forward. For example, deleting your sheet programmatically, as well as making an auto copy for yourself. There's a function in there that just says copy spreadsheet, so you can just, every time before anything executes, you make a copy, and it has a different name, and so it's there in case you mess things up. And then again, just as a reminder, start index for get range is at 1. Get values returns a 2-dimensional array which starts at 0. That really confused me. So, extending the example, you saw that we just sent out sort of a generic blank email to everybody who didn't have a permission slip. It's entirely possible to just send out an email, say a personalized email that has the student's name in there and exactly why they're not ineligible. So instead of you have a permission slip, it's you're not eligible because you didn't turn in assignment 2, your behavior is bad, or whatever the case is. That's pretty simple. Oh, and then also Google does allow you to embed your spreadsheets. Not sure if you're aware of that, but if you go to a file and then publish to web, it'll give you the code for an iframe. So if you wanted to even just put this in your Canvas course, you can't edit while you're doing it, but if you want to put it in your Canvas course so you could see the information, you can do that as well. So here's a list of the resources, and again, I'm going to make these available with the actual link so that you can get to them. And I'll include a link on how to generate a Canvas API token. Okay, and for me, this is sort of the process and the flow that I went through. So I got super excited. I was like, oh my gosh, custom functions are so amazing. I'm going to do everything with a custom function. And then it got really unwieldy, and it took way too much time than it used to. So I got really bummed out. I'm like, I'm never using I'm never doing this custom function stuff ever again. And now I'm kind of coming back up and saying, okay, you know what? Why don't I take like 20 or 30 minutes, see if I can figure it out with the standard functions, and if I can't, then I'm going to go write my own or do a macro or whatever. So anyway, that's kind of what I went through. Do we have any questions about anything that we've talked about? Yeah. It does not ask for it. So how I pass it in, so that's why I just, so if it does have a parameter, that's why I created this like test function, so that I could say is eligible, and then I will just pass in the parameters myself. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. That's it. Thanks, everybody.